My name is Nora Callahan. I was 26 years old when my father called me to say my grandmother's money was gone. $405,000. Gone. That is what he said. In a 4-minute phone call. In a voice that was careful and practiced, the way a voice gets when it has been rehearsing the same sentence for weeks. He said, "Unfortunately, there really isn't much left." I said, "Thank you, Dad. I'll call you back." And then I opened the folder that had been sitting on my kitchen shelf since March. Inside was a single bank statement. My grandmother's name at the top. The date, Tuesday, March 12, 2024. The balance, $405,000. I had been in that branch when this account was opened. I had sat beside her. I had watched her sign the documents with her own hand. And when we walked out, the teller had printed 2 copies, one for her, one for me, because I was listed as the alternate on the account. My father forgot about my copy. He forgot that the alternate gets the paperwork too. And that was the only mistake he needed to make. What he did with that money. What I found when I started pulling the documents apart. What happened in a probate courtroom 9 months later when a judge looked at the same statement I was holding in my kitchen, it changed everything. But what none of them knew, not my father, not my mother, not the attorney they eventually hired, was that before I ever said a word to any of them, I had already made the call. Welcome back to Deep Karma Stories. This is where real stories unfold, the betrayals, the quiet strength, and the moments when the person everyone underestimated turns out to have been the one keeping score all along. If this story is already sitting in your chest, drop a comment and subscribe. I want to know where in the world you're listening from right now. This one is going to take a while to tell properly. Stay with me. My grandmother's name was Helen. Helen Ruth Callahan. Born 1942 in a small town in eastern Idaho to a father who worked the railroad and a mother who kept the books for 3 local businesses out of a ledger she bought at the hardware store. Helen grew up understanding exactly what money was. Not a symbol. Not a reward. A tool. Something you built with carefully and protected when you'd finished building. She was 79 years old when this story begins. She had a house she'd owned outright since 1988. 2 savings accounts, 1 investment portfolio she had managed herself for 30 years, and a small rental property 2 blocks from the house where she lived. She took no medication she didn't understand. She read every piece of mail the same day it arrived. She kept her important documents in a metal box in the closet of her spare bedroom, and she knew exactly what was in it. I want you to understand that about her before we go any further. My grandmother was not a confused woman. She was not easily overwhelmed. She was not the kind of person whose affairs could be managed without her full awareness. She was sharp until nearly the end. And the people who tried to move her money counted on everyone forgetting that. I have an older brother, Andrew, and my parents, Dale and Susan Callahan, live 40 minutes from where my grandmother lived. My brother lives in Phoenix. I am the one who stayed close. That was never a decision I made formally. It was just what happened. I ended up in the same city, I had Sundays free, and so I spent them with her. Every week for about 4 years, I drove to my grandmother's house on Sunday morning. I brought pastries from the bakery on 5th Street. We watched whatever she wanted on television, and she told me things I had not known about her life before I was born. How she met my grandfather. How she lost him. How she bought the rental property the same year my father started high school, because she wanted something that belonged completely to her. She talked about money the way other people talk about relationships. With respect. With a history. She also talked about my father. Not often. Not unkindly. But there were moments. He means well, she would say. But Dale has always confused wanting something with deserving it. I filed those words away. I didn't understand them completely until later. By the fall of 2023, her health had started to change. Nothing sudden, nothing catastrophic. She was tired in ways she hadn't been before. Her hands, which had always been steady, developed a fine tremor. She moved more slowly through the house. Her doctor adjusted 2 of her medications and recommended she think about simplifying her finances, consolidating accounts, updating her documents, making sure everything was organized. She called me in October and said she wanted my help doing that. I want to be very careful about this. I want to make sure things are in order. And I trust you to help me get there. I said yes. Of course I said yes. My father, when he heard, said he wanted to be involved. He volunteered immediately. He said he had experience with this kind of thing, that he would handle whatever needed to be handled. My grandmother thanked him. She was gracious about it. And then she called me separately and said, I want you on the documents, Nora. As the alternate. I need someone who will keep their eyes open. I told her I understood. I think she needed to hear that. March 2024. A Tuesday afternoon, cool and clear, the kind of afternoon that feels ordinary in every way until it isn't. I picked my grandmother up at 11 o'clock. She was dressed, ready, waiting at the door with her coat already on. She had the metal box under one arm, the one from the spare bedroom closet. She had gone through it the night before, she told me. Everything she needed was inside. We drove to the branch she had used for 30 years. The same teller window she had stood at since before I was born. My father met us there. He was already inside when we arrived. He had brought his own folder. He was wearing a good shirt, the kind he saved for when he wanted to seem capable. He shook the branch manager's hand with both of his. The meeting took about 90 minutes. I will not go through every detail of what was discussed that day. What matters is this. My grandmother consolidated her primary savings into one account. The total was $405,000 in cash, separate from the real estate and the portfolio. My father was listed as the primary financial power of attorney. I was listed as the alternate. At the time, this felt like a formality. My grandmother was still living alone, still managing her own affairs, still sharp. The POA documents were precautionary. If something happened, if she became unable to make decisions, there was a structure in place. My father would handle things, and I would be there to verify. Before we left, the teller printed account summaries. My grandmother took one copy. I took another. My father took one as well. On the drive home, my grandmother was quiet for a while. Then she said something I didn't fully understand until months later. I'm glad you were there, Nora. You have a good memory. Keep what they gave you. I put the printout in my glove compartment. Later that week, I moved it to a folder on my kitchen shelf. I don't know why I kept it so carefully. I'm not, by nature, the kind of person who holds on to paperwork. But something about the way she said it made me treat it like something that mattered. It was the most important piece of paper I would ever have in my possession. The months between March and July moved the way grief always moves. Slowly, then all at once. By April, my grandmother was having more difficult days. By May, she had a home health aide 3 mornings a week. By June, the aide was there every day. I still came on Sundays. My father came more often now too, I noticed that. He was present in ways he hadn't been before. He drove her to 2 of her doctor's appointments. He called her on weekdays. He offered to help organize her mail. My grandmother accepted his help the way she accepted most things graciously, while keeping her own observations to herself. One Sunday in June, I arrived and she was in the chair by the front window, looking out at the yard. She didn't hear me come in at first. When she turned, her expression was hard to read. Not sad, exactly. Something more like resolved. She said, "The people who want something usually find a way to be helpful right before they take it." I sat down across from her. I said, "Are you trying to tell me something?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'm tired, Nora. Keep the papers." 2 weeks later, on a Friday evening in July, she passed away at home. Quietly in her own bed, with the aide present. I was at work when it happened. My father called me 40 minutes after. He used a careful voice. The kind of voice that is managing something even while it is grieving. I drove to the house. I sat with her for a while. I said goodbye. Then I went home, and I waited to hear what came next. The call came a week later. My father. His voice was organized. Measured. He said he wanted to walk me through how things stood. There were expenses, he said. The care in those final months had added up. The aid, the medications, some home modifications. Things he had handled quietly because he hadn't wanted to worry me. He said, "Unfortunately, the account has pretty much run dry." I let the silence sit for a moment. I said, "What do you mean?" He explained that the account had been drawn down over the course of the last several months. By May, he said he had moved a portion of it, about $130,000, into certificates of deposit. For safekeeping, he said. Better interest. And then after her death, when those CDs came due and the remaining account was settled, there wasn't much left to speak of. He said, I know this is hard to hear. I tried to manage everything as carefully as I could. These things happen with elderly care. I said, can you send me the documentation? A pause. Short. He said, of course. I'll put it together. I said thank you. I said I'd talk to him soon. I hung up. Then I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. I pulled out the folder. I found the March statement. $405,000. I found a small notebook I used for tracking expenses, and I wrote down every number I could account for. The aid, according to the agency invoices I had helped my grandmother organize in April, $11 an hour, 6 hours a day, 90 days. I ran the math. The medications, approximately $300 a month for months. A few miscellaneous costs. My total, roughly $27,000 in legitimate expenses. $405,000 minus $27,000 is $378,000. I wrote that number down. Then I sat with it. Then I called my aunt. My grandmother's sister, my great-aunt Meredith, had been named as a secondary beneficiary in the estate. She lived in Oregon. She and my grandmother had been close in the way of old women who have outlived almost everyone else they loved. They called each other every Sunday evening. Meredith answered on the second ring. I told her what my father had said. I told her the number I had come up with. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, Nora. I have been waiting for someone to say this out loud. She told me she had tried to get information from my father 2 weeks after my grandmother died. She had asked about the estate timeline, the account balances, the assets. He had told her it was complicated. He had told her there were debts she wasn't aware of. He had told her these things take time. She said, I didn't believe him. I just didn't know what to do about it. I told her I was going to find out what to do. I had a folder with a March bank statement and a number that didn't add up. That was where I was starting. Before I go on, I want to stop for a moment. If you have ever had a conversation that made something shift in your chest, where someone said the thing you had been holding alone and suddenly you were not alone anymore, I want to hear about it. Tell me in the comments. We're not done yet. But this is the part where it stops being a suspicion and starts being a case. The next morning, I called an estate attorney. Her name was Patricia Alland. She came recommended by a woman in my building who had used her the year before when her mother's estate had been mishandled. I called at 8 in the morning. She took my call herself. I told her the story in 12 minutes. The account. The March statement. My father's phone call. The math. She said, do you have copies of the POA documents? Yes. Do you have the March bank statement? Yes. Do you have any records of the legitimate expenses, the aid invoices, the medical bills? I have some of them. I can get more. She said, then you have more than most people have when they call me. Come in tomorrow. I sat across from her in a small, organized office. She had a yellow legal pad and a blue pen. She listened without interrupting while I laid everything out. When I finished, she set her pen down and said something I want to explain clearly, because it is the legal foundation of everything that followed. A financial power of attorney is not a gift. It is a legal responsibility. The person who holds it, the agent, has what is called a fiduciary duty to the person they represent. That means they are legally obligated to act in that person's best interest. Not their own. Not the family's. Solely in the interest of the person they serve. Using a financial POA to move or control assets in ways that benefit the agent at the expense of the account holder is a breach of that fiduciary duty. In Idaho, it is not just a civil matter. It is a crime. She said, if the numbers you've given me are accurate, and from what you've described, I believe they are, your father had no legal basis to move that money. None at all. I sat very still and let that land. She continued. There are 2 things we need to do. First, I want you to file a report with Idaho Adult Protective Services. Your grandmother was a vulnerable adult under the law, elderly, in declining health, with a legal agent in control of her finances. What you're describing is textbook financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Second, I'm going to draft a formal demand letter to your father. He needs to produce a complete accounting of every disbursement made from that account since March. Dates, amounts, documentation. If he can account for the money legitimately, he produces the receipts. If he can't, then we know what we're dealing with. I asked, what if he refuses? She said, then we file a petition to compel a state disclosure in probate court. And we let the court ask for the receipts instead. I drove home with 2 pages of notes. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table and drafted a timeline. Every date I could remember. Every call I had logged. Every expense I could verify. I called Meredith in Oregon and asked her to write down everything my father had said to her, every conversation she could remember, every number he had mentioned. She said, I've already started. I'll have it to you by Friday. The Adult Protective Services report was filed in June. I am compressing the timeline slightly here, but I want to be clear that every step I am describing happened. I filed a formal complaint with Idaho APS alleging financial exploitation of a vulnerable elder and breach of fiduciary duty by the designated POA. I want to explain what APS can actually do, because when I filed that report, I didn't fully understand it myself. Adult Protective Services in Idaho has the authority to investigate suspected financial abuse of vulnerable adults independently of the family's wishes. They can compel financial disclosures. They can interview account holders, agents, family members. They can contact law enforcement if their investigation uncovers criminal activity. And their findings carry legal weight not just in civil court, but potentially in criminal proceedings. My father did not know I had filed. I did not tell him. The demand letter went out the following week. Patricia sent it on her firm's letterhead. Formal, specific. It requested a complete accounting of all disbursements from the account since March 2024. It itemized what we expected to see: the aid costs, the medical bills, the home modification expenses. It identified the approximate total of $27,000 in legitimate expected expenses. It noted the discrepancy of approximately $378,000. It gave my father 30 days to respond with full documentation. It was 2 pages long and every sentence was factual. My father called me 2 days later. His voice was different this time. The managed quality was still there, but underneath it, something had changed. A tightness. Like he was choosing his words with much more care than usual. He said this was unnecessary. He said he had everything documented. He said involving a lawyer was an overreaction. I said, then the documentation should be easy to produce. He said, Nora, this is going to cause a lot of damage to this family. I said, the damage is already there, Dad. I'm just asking for the receipts. He said he would have his own attorney look at it. I said, that's fine. My attorney's contact information is on the letter. I hung up. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after that. Not upset, exactly. Something harder to name. Like watching a door you had always believed was solid turn out to have nothing behind it. Meredith called that evening. She said, how are you holding up? I told her the truth. I said I felt very calm and that the calm surprised me and that I wasn't sure yet whether to trust it. She said, your grandmother felt calm too. Right at the end. I think she knew she had put the right things in the right hands. I thought about the bank. The copy she told me to keep. The March afternoon, ordinary and cool. I keep your papers. Yes, Grandma. I kept them. After the demand letter, there was a period of quiet. My father did not produce documentation within the 30-day window. His attorney sent Patricia a brief letter acknowledging the request and asking for an extension. Patricia replied with a letter that was shorter and less accommodating. The extension was not granted. The matter moved to probate court. I want to tell you about the silence itself for a moment, because I think it is important. When someone who is innocent is asked to show their receipts, they show their receipts. They might be annoyed. They might feel accused. But they produce the documentation because the documentation exists and it clears them. When someone does not produce documentation within 30 days, then requests more time, then produces documentation that is partial and inconsistent, that silence is not neutrality. It is an answer. My father's silence told me exactly what I needed to know. Patricia told me something similar, in more legal language. She said, in a fiduciary dispute, the burden shifts to the agent when there is evidence of unexplained transfers. Your father isn't just being asked to prove his innocence. He's legally required to account for every dollar. Every dollar. And when the accounting doesn't add up, it's not a misunderstanding. It's a breach. The estate inventory was compelled by the court. This is what that means in practice. When a probate court orders an estate inventory, the agent, in this case, my father, is legally required to produce a comprehensive record of every asset that existed at the time of death and every transaction that affected those assets in the period before death. Every withdrawal. Every transfer. Every CD if CDs exist. The inventory came back. I will not give you every number, but here's what it showed. The CDs my father had described, $130,000 he said he had moved into certificates of deposit for safekeeping, could only be partially documented. He produced records for approximately $42,000 in CDs. The remaining $88,000 had no corresponding paperwork. No bank confirmation. No maturity date. No account number. $88,000 in claim CDs that produced no evidence of ever existing. Patricia set the inventory on her desk, looked at me over her glasses, and said, "This is exactly what I expected. And it's exactly what the court needed to see." She filed a petition for a formal accounting and recovery. The matter was referred to the Idaho Attorney General's office for review of potential criminal violations. My father called me when he found out about the AG referral. He called 3 times in one afternoon. I let the first 2 go. I answered the third. He was not calm this time. He said, "Do you understand what you're doing? You're going to destroy this family." I said, "I'm trying to find out where Grandma's money went." He said, "I managed everything. I did everything. While you were at your Sunday brunches, I was the one handling the hard parts." I said, "You had 90 days of care costs and $27,000 in legitimate expenses. The account had $405,000 in March. That is a difference of $378,000. I need you to explain that difference." He went quiet. Then he said, "The CDs." I said, "The ones you can only document 42,000 of?" "Nothing." I said, "Dad, I'm not asking for an apology. I'm not asking you to explain yourself to me. I'm asking for the money that belongs to Grandma's estate. That's it. Show the court where it went, and this is over." He said, "You don't know everything about what she wanted." I said, "I know what she put in writing. I know what she told me to hold on to. And I know what a March bank statement says." He hung up. I sat in my kitchen with the phone in my hand for a long moment. Then I picked it up and called Meredith. She answered right away. She said, "I heard it went to the AG's office." I said yes. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that I've thought about many times since. She said, "Helen used to say that the people who are most afraid of the truth are the ones who had the longest time to hide it." She wasn't surprised when things went wrong with people. She was just prepared. I thought about the metal box. The bank. The copy she pressed into my hand. "Keep what they gave you." She had been prepared too. My brother Andrew called in October. He had heard about the legal proceedings through my father. He had heard my father's version, which I imagine was different from mine. He said, "Nora, I really think you should consider dropping this. It's going to cost more than you recover. It's going to tear the family apart. And Mom is devastated." I let him finish. Then I said, "Andrew, Grandma had $405,000 in March. She died in July. For months. $27,000 in documented expenses. Where's the rest?" He said, "Dad says the CDs." I said, "He can account for 42,000 of the CDs. I need an explanation for the other 336,000. Long silence. He said, "I didn't know it was that much." I said, "Now you do." He said he needed to think about it. I said that was fine. I said he knew where to find me. He called back 3 days later. He said, "I'm not going to get involved. I just want you to know that I believe you." That was enough. The legal process took months. I am not going to pretend it was clean or fast or without cost. Attorney fees. Court filings. Nights when I sat at the kitchen table and thought about whether this was worth what it was taking from me. Every time I thought about stopping, I looked at the folder. The March statement. $405,000. Her name at the top. Mine at the bottom. She put my name there for a reason. She told me to keep the papers for a reason. She said keep your eyes open, and she said it to me, specifically, because she knew something I was still learning. That love does not protect you from the people who confuse wanting something with deserving it. That the people who matter most to you are sometimes the most dangerous people to trust with what matters most. And that the best way to honor someone who prepared carefully is to be just as careful yourself. The court proceedings found a substantial shortfall in the estate accounting. My father was ordered to provide full restitution to the estate, a figure the court determined based on the documented balance minus verified expenses. A portion of the missing funds was recovered through the probate process. The AG's office pursued the criminal referral. I am not going to tell you it all came back. Not every dollar. But here is what I will tell you. The estate was not closed quietly. The story my father told, that the money had simply run out, that these things happen, that there wasn't much left, was not the story the court accepted. The March bank statement sat on a judge's desk. The same paper my grandmother told me to keep. It said exactly what it had always said. Meredith and I talk every few weeks now. We talk about Helen. About the things she got right. About the way she moved through life with that particular combination of warmth and clarity that I am still trying to learn. Meredith told me once, she knew people were going to come for it. She'd watched it happen to friends, to neighbors. An old woman with assets and children who felt entitled. She just wanted to make sure that when it happened, someone had the receipts. I asked her, do you think she knew it would be him? She said, I think she hoped she was wrong. But she made sure someone was watching, just in case she wasn't. I still live in the same city. I still drive past the bank branch where I sat with her that Tuesday in March. Sometimes I slow down a little when I pass it. I think about her coat. The metal box. The way she sat in the chair across from the branch manager and still held herself like someone who had been managing her own affairs for 60 years. She was 80 years old, and she understood exactly what was happening, and she prepared for it the best way she knew how. She gave me a copy of a piece of paper. She told me to keep my eyes open. I did. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you that the quiet things matter, that paperwork matters, that the small careful acts of someone who saw what was coming can be the thing that sets everything right, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Share it with someone who might need to hear it. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I read them. I really do. If you have ever held on to something that mattered, a document, a promise, a piece of paper that felt important even before you knew why, tell me about it below. These stories exist because of the people who refuse to let the quiet version of events be the final one. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next.